Spiritual Power, Chapter 5, Spirit, Essential Life. Having considered the first great mode or aspect of spirit, i.e., that of presence, manifesting essence, reality, actuality, you are now invited to consider the second great mode or aspect of spirit, namely life, manifesting sentience, conation, and volition. This is the unique, original, distinguishing characteristic of spirit. Life and livingness are the very quintessence of spirit, the very spirit of spirit. Spirit is life. Life is spirit. By life is meant state of being alive, living, or vital force, animation, livingness. The standard definitions are poor, meager, unsatisfying. But inasmuch as life can be defined only in terms of livingness, there is no possible improvement in such definitions. There is nothing else in existence like life, to or with which it may be compared and likened, contrasted and classified, and which may be employed to illustrate or define it. One must have experienced life in order to understand its real meaning. The term livingness is no better. Its definition is merely suggestive, namely, the state of being alive, lively, active, vigorous, spirited, and capable of quickening and invigorating. All such definitions refer back to life, and life is found to be sui generis, in a class by itself, over and above any definition or explanation, any accounting for or illustration in the terms of anything else. Life is known only through being experienced. To know life is to live. To live is to know life. Life is a basic, fundamental attribute of spirit. Spirit would not be spirit were it devoid of livingness. You may conceive of spirit as being unconscious, but you cannot conceive of it as being lifeless. Life is more fundamental than consciousness. A creature may become unconscious yet still be alive, but it cannot become lifeless and still be conscious. All feeling, thought, and will may be inactive in a creature, yet it may still be alive. But if it is lifeless, then it can never manifest thought, feeling, or will. If you wish to think of spirit in its most essential, fundamental, and basic inner nature and character, then think of it as life or livingness. The three particular manifestations of the life of spirit are as follows: sentience, conation, and volition. Each of these we shall now consider briefly. Sentience. By sentience is meant the faculty or power of sensation, perception, mental apprehension, and cognition. These are the several primary and elemental mental powers. The higher mental processes are merely more complex phases of these simpler mental activities. These faculties supply the raw materials of knowledge, which are worked over and made into the completed mental product. In sensation, spirit receives impressions from material objects. In perception, spirit recognizes and interprets the reports of sensation. In mental apprehension, spirit takes hold of and conceives ideas. In cognition, spirit knows things partially or completely. The idea of sentience is closely bound up with that of consciousness. The latter term, though like life being beyond adequate definition, is best defined by the term awareness. Consciousness has been likened to mental livingness or aliveness, this being a valuable suggestive illustration. In modern psychology, consciousness is regarded merely as present mind or mind here and now, a cross-section of mental process, a focusing of attention upon a certain limited portion of the entire mental process. Much of the mental activity, most of the mental processes manifest on planes of mentation outside, below, or above the plane of ordinary consciousness. Many persons, most persons in fact, are accustomed to regard spirit as identical with mind. They find it difficult to think of spirit in any other way. But mind in modern psychology is regarded as process rather than as an entity. As an authoritative reference work states, not only is mind as a whole a stream of thought and feeling, each separate element of mind or mental formation that our analysis teases out of the total consciousness is itself a process. Every sensation rises, poises, falls in its own characteristic way, Even the ideas termed a variable process, and such formations as emotion and volition bear the mark of process stamped upon them. Spirit, on the contrary, is absolute and actual entity, not process. It is the essence, base and ground, support and sustainer, and constant identity of mental process. Spirit is not limited to mind, nor is mind another name for spirit. Rather, spirit has mind, uses mind, employs mind, i.e., mental process, as an instrument, tool, or machine, helpful in its creative and other activities. Nor at the last is it proper to regard consciousness as identical with or as an absolute, essential, and permanent state or condition of spirit. G. E. Moore, in a leading reference work upon philosophy and psychology, says, "Common to all meanings of spirit is the conception of that which is conscious. Consciousness is not regarded as being spirit, but as being an attribute of it, so that spirit is conceived as something capable of existing when it is not conscious. On the other hand, there is no positive conception of what this permanent element in the spirit is. It is only conceived abstractly as that, whatever it may be, which is the subject or substance of consciousness, and negatively as not identical with any known quality." But we ask you to note here that although it is possible to conceive spirit as not conscious, it is not possible to conceive it as not alive, nor as not capable of consciousness. Life is the primary attribute. Consciousness is the secondary property. But as spirit is always life, and as life always has the faculty of or capacity for sentience and consciousness, then we see that whatever and whenever spirit is present, then and there must be present the capacity for sentience and consciousness in some form, kind, manner, or degree. Conation. By conation is meant tendency toward effort, attempt, experiment, action, arising from the presence of a feeling, emotion, or desire. A leading reference work states, "Conation consists of an endeavor, a striving to attain something. The attempt to recall a name from memory is a conation. Conation is common to desire, yearning, longing, craving, wishing, and willing. Indeed, to all mental states which have an inherent tendency to pass beyond themselves. Conation has for its object the attainment of its desire for that which it likes and finds pleasant, or the escape or release from that which it does not like and finds unpleasant. In short, conation is desire seeking to pass into action in the direction most contenting, satisfying, and agreeable to it. Conation, or active desire, is a universal element of life. It is found in all living things and is the mainspring of all the actions of all living creatures, including plants, animals, human beings, from single living cells to the most complex living forms and organisms. Many philosophers have regarded it as the most essential element in life and as being the kernel and core of the mind, soul, or spirit of all living things, and of life in general and as a totality. Schopenhauer postulates it as the fundamental fact of all activities, inorganic as well as organic. Wundt says the mechanical universe is the outer wrapper behind which is hidden a spiritual creative activity, a striving, feeling, sensing like that which we experience in ourselves, conation being the fundamental essence of that activity. Conation is a fundamental property of life. It is more elemental than even sentience, for in the lower classes of living creatures, it manifests strongly even where sentience manifests merely in its simplest forms. In plant life, it represents the chief psychic element, sentience being expressed only in the slightest degree. Certain philosophers like Schopenhauer and his school hold that the world spirit is animated chiefly by its will to live, i.e. its desire to express life activities, and accordingly they regard the universal life principle as being essentially conative desire rather than reason. Others have modified this view and give sentience an equal rank with conation, although admitting that in the lower form of life, the latter is predominant. Inasmuch as conation is an essential element of life, and as life and livingness constitute a primary, fundamental, essential attribute of spirit, it follows that wherever and whenever spirit is present and active, then and there also is conation present and active. Even without accepting the extreme position of the schools of philosophy just referred to, it is impossible to escape the conviction that when spirit, the cosmic spirit, manifests creative power, it must experience the conative desire to do so, and that this conation is the actuating cause and because of the creative activity of spirit. Without it, creation would never have been manifested. Without it, creation would not have continued and would not now be underway. Volition. By volition is meant the act of willing or the exercise of will, the power of willing and determining. That property of life known as volition may be stated as the power to will or willpower. Will is the power of self-activity, self-motion, and the exercise of voluntary effort and action. Professor Halleck says of will concerns itself with action, no matter how complex the process seems. Whenever there is a mental motor element, that element is will. Our acts are the result of a peculiar active power, which we call will. From the cradle to the grave, we are never without this activity of will in the broadest sense of the term. Whenever there is an emotion, a motor element which tends to go out in action, that element is will. In some emotions, the voluntary element may be so small as to baffle detection, but the germ is there. The distinguishing characteristic of will activity is that important element of life known as spontaneity. So essentially is spontaneity bound up with life that many careful thinkers have regarded it as a touchstone by which the livingness of things may be tested and decided upon. This view expresses itself in the axiom, where spontaneity is present, there life is present. Where life is present, there spontaneity is present. The present writers accept this view and regard the axiom as self-evident truth and as setting up an infallible standard by means of which the presence of life and livingness may be decided conclusively. Spontaneity. By spontaneity is meant the state of being spontaneous, i.e., proceeding from internal impulse, energy, or natural tendency without external force. In its manifestation by living creatures, spontaneity is defined as action proceeding from or manifesting by natural feeling, tendency, emotion, temperament, disposition, or desire, modified perhaps by reflection, consideration, or judgment based upon the results of previous experience, but always without constraint or external force. Spontaneity, then, is seen to be a phase of self-activity, volition or will, the objective phase of that of which conation and volition are the subjective phases or aspects. Every voluntary act arising from conative feeling or desire is self-activity. Self-activity is activity arising from the conative volitional will of the individual and not from external force, pressure, or energy. Every voluntary act or activity, mental or physical, is self-activity. All self-activity is spontaneity. The essence of conation, volition, will, self-activity, and spontaneity is the same. Each represents willpower, which is life power, which is spiritual power. An ancient Greek philosopher once said, "Will is the inherent capacity for spontaneous action or self-motion and does not proceed from external force, though its direction may be influenced by external causes represented in the mentality." Carus says, by spontaneity is to be understood that kind of activity which springs from the nature of the thing or being which is active. A motion that is caused by pressure or push is not spontaneous, but a motion, the motive power of which resides in the moving object, is spontaneous. In the character of a thing lies the source of its spontaneous action. Webster's Collegiate Dictionary gives three terms, i.e., voluntary, uncompelled, and willing as synonyms for the term spontaneous, adding, what is voluntary is the result of a volition or act of choice. It therefore implies some degree of consideration and may be the result of mere reason without excited feeling. What is spontaneous springs wholly from feeling or a sudden impulse, which admits of no reflection. This distinction is properly made and is worthy of respect. It should be noted, however, that while some volitions proceed without excited feeling, there is always at least some degree of feeling and desire present, else there could and would be no motive for conative and voluntary action. As we have said, many careful thinkers hold that spontaneity or self-activity is the invariable characteristic of life. In this view, anything and everything that manifests the property of spontaneity must be alive and living. The presence of spontaneity in things usually considered non-living is held to indicate livingness. As spontaneity is found to be present even in the atoms and chemical elements, it is held by these thinkers that they manifest livingness and that the universe is alive in its every part and as a whole. As life is an attribute of spirit, in this view, it would follow that the universe is animated and inspired by spirit. It was formerly a favorite objection urged by materialism that if spirit is the origin and source of all things, then spirit, i.e. life, mind, and will, should be found in at least some degree or form in everything. The answer of the modern spiritual philosophy is everything does manifest life, mind, and will, i.e. spirit, in some degree or form. The ancient sages always intuitively believed and taught this truth, but it remained for modern physical science to demonstrate it by observation and experiment. Today, the advanced minds of philosophy and science are assenting to the proposition that the universe is alive as a whole and in every part. Each new discovery serves to substantiate this idea, and each year adds to the ranks of its advocates. Luther Burbank, as the result of his lifetime study of life, says, all my investigations have led me away from the idea of a dead universe tossed about by various forces to that of a universe which is absolutely all life, soul, or thought, or whatever name we choose to call it. All life on our planet is, so to speak, just on the outer fringe of this infinite ocean of force. The universe is not half dead, but all alive. Haeckel, the eminent scientist philosopher, says, I regard all matter as ensouled, that is to say, as endowed with feeling, pleasure and pain, and with motion, or better, the power of motion. As elementary, atomic attraction and repulsion, these powers are asserted in every simplest chemical process, and on them is based every other phenomenon, consequently also the highest developed soul activity of man. The molecules or atoms of two elements, when brought into proper distance, mutually feel each other, and by attraction move toward each other, or the contrary takes place by reason of repulsion. Empedocles' doctrine of the love and hatred of atoms. I cannot imagine the simplest chemical and physical process without attributing the movements of the material particles to unconscious sensation. The idea of chemical affinity consists in the fact that the various chemical elements perceive the qualitative differences in other elements, experience pleasure or revulsion at contact with them, and execute specific movements on this ground. Haeckel also quotes approvingly the statement of Nageli, another scientist, who said, if the molecules possess something that is related, however distantly, to sensation, it must be comfortable to be able to follow their attractions and repulsions, uncomfortable when they are forced to do otherwise. Flammarion says, mind gleams in every atom. There is mind in everything, not only in human and animal life, but in plants, in minerals, in space. Cope says, the basis of life and mind lies back of the atoms and may be found in the universal ether. Hemstreet says, Mind in the ether is no more unnatural than is mind in flesh and blood. Salaby says, life is potential in matter. Life energy is not a thing unique and created at a particular time in the past. If life is potential in matter, it is 1,000 times more evident that mind is potential in life. The evolutionist is impelled to believe that mind is potential in matter. The microscopic cell, a minute speck of matter that is to become man, has in it the promise and germ of mind. May we not then draw the inference that the elements of mind are present in those chemical elements, carbon, oxygen, hydrogen, nitrogen, sulfur, phosphorus, sodium, potassium, chlorine, that are found in the cell? Not only must we do so, but we must go further, since we know that each of these elements and every other is built up out of the one invariable unit, the electron, and must therefore assert that mind is potential in the unit of matter, the electron itself. Carr says, I am willing to concede to Professor Haeckel that all nature is alive. Indeed, I have most emphatically insisted that there is a spontaneity pervading all nature. The term life is used here in a broader sense than ordinarily. It here means spontaneity of self-motion, while in its common significance, it is restricted to the spontaneous actions of organized beings, i.e. of plants and animals. I propose what might best be called panbiotism, briefly set forth in the maxim, everything is fraught with life. It contains life. It has the ability to live. We have not the space here to describe in detail the experiments and observations that have brought science to this conclusion, to the conclusion that there is life in everything. Everything is alive. Interesting and instructive though such description would be. In fact, we can refer but briefly even to the general results. Reference to the records of modern physics and biology will serve to substantiate our claims. Of life in even the simplest animal forms, we need not speak. Science has demonstrated beyond question the presence of life and elemental mind in plant life, even in its simplest forms. Crystals are now regarded as quasi-living forms, just a little lower in the scale than plants. Some scientists have even ascribed elemental sex to them. In this connection, it is interesting to compare ordinary crystals with the lowly life forms known as the diatoms, or living crystals, or living geometrical forms, as they have been called. Also, to note how closely the crystals of frost and ice resembled the forms of leaves, branches, foliage, etc., to examine the garden of frost flowers formed on the pane of glass in wintertime. Experiments have produced an orchid-like crystal flower from a disk of saltpeter subjected to polarized light. The celebrated Bose experiments prove conclusively that inorganic substances may be weakened, made ill, and even killed by pressure or electric currents, the process of dying registering itself unmistakably through the delicate mechanism employed. Moreover, metals and machinery made of metals suffer from fatigue and are benefited by rest. Tuning forks and razor blades are a familiar example of this fact. Every machinist knows that there is something in it. Metals may be poisoned by certain chemicals and actually killed in some cases. There is a window glass disease known to science. It is contagious and spreads from one pane to another under certain conditions. Instances illustrating this general fact of the livingness of inorganic things might be multiplied indefinitely. The list is being added to every year as a result of new experiments. Life, mind, will, consciousness, desire, volition, spontaneity, self-activity, conative energy. These are discovered to be in existence throughout all nature. You know them directly through your own experience. By scientific observation, you perceive them indirectly as manifest in all other things. They are beyond chemical analysis or physical dissection. They are revealed neither by the test tube nor by the retort. The scalpel does not reveal their presence. The microscope does not make them visible. The finest scales of the physicists does not record their weight, though certain delicate instruments have been invented which register the physical effects manifested by them. They cannot be produced synthetically by combinations, correlations, or coordinations of chemical elements. Neither can mechanical power account for or explain them, much less produce them. Biology reports that all life proceeds from life. Livingness has never been known to proceed from non-livingness. Life, at the last, is perceived to be ultimate and universal. Livingness is seen to be a manifestation of an infinite life principle, and that principle is discovered to be spirit and nothing else. Honest thought and logical reasoning make an invariable, inevitable, and infallible report to this effect. Had there ever been a time in which life was not present, then there would be no livingness today. Life being present today is evidence that life has always been present in some form, phase, or condition. Philosophical thought finds the only thinkable source or origin of life in the ultimate principle of spirit. Wherever there is life, there must be spirit. As life is universal, then spirit must be universal. Spirit, reduced to its ultimate nature, reports itself as life. Lifeless spirit is inconceivable. Life, reduced to its ultimate nature, reports itself as spirit. Spiritless life is unthinkable. Thus, life and spirit are seen to be but different names for the same ultimate fact, principal power. Thus, life and spirit are seen to be but different names for the same ultimate fact, principle, and power. If you wish to think of spirit in its simplest terms, employ the terms of life and livingness. Whatever else spirit may be or may not be, it is always life and livingness.